All right, students, this is your instructor, Janae Pelletier, and this is the second half of our Chapter 4 video lecture. So the book talks a fair amount about accessibility, and there are a lot of components related to this. I don't think it was very well covered, so I will have some additional information. This is not in your textbook. So when you're thinking about your guests that are coming to your event, there are many different types of guest needs that you may have to accommodate. You might have guests with physical challenges or limited mobility, difficult getting around your venue. You might have guests with visual challenges who are sight impaired or also may need some help being guided around the venue. You might have guests with auditory or speech challenges. You might have guests with invisible or hidden disabilities, and this one can be a challenge because there are many people out there that are suffering with some sort of a disability that is not immediately visible to you as the event organizer or to other guests at your event. And so it's important to ask as part of your registration process, do you have any disabilities of which we should be aware? The point of asking this is because you want to know as the organizer, is there somebody that needs special seating? Is there somebody that's going to need help navigating the conference venue? Is there somebody that needs an interpreter? Or sign language interpreter or something like that. So it's important to collect this information so that you understand the limitations of your guests that are coming and to figure out a plan for how you can accommodate them. You also might have guests with some sort of a temporary condition, either an illness or something like pregnancy or nursing, that might have some special needs. So it's important to understand all the different types of guests that are coming to your event and to be able to develop a plan for what they need. I have a little video here that we're going to watch, oh dear, about disability etiquette. Let me see, hopefully this will work. We'll see here. All right, very good. Here we go.
Disability etiquette is kind of the basic do's and don'ts when you are interacting with someone with a particular type of disability. I'm Stephanie Cunningham, co-founder of the Lighthouse Group Consulting. We specialize in disability awareness, ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, training, group facilitation, and customer service regarding folks with disabilities. And I've been doing that for the past 22 years. Attitudes combined with our language can impact our behavior. People with disabilities are people just like you. You want to show the respect and courteousness that you would offer anybody else. I mean, it really gets back down to that. And remember, if you are uncomfortable with someone who has maybe a particular type of disability, that really is okay. We're human. We can all have our own fears and discomfort and lack of knowledge, which can create our fear. But you need to be aware of that fear and discomfort and work through it pretty quick if you're going to be having an interaction, because you could inadvertently discriminate against someone out of that place. When I get uncomfortable in a situation, I just bring myself back in and go, okay, this is a person first. How can we connect on that level? It's very, very subtle, and yet it can really impact how we think. If folks refer to me as someone who suffers from chronic pain, or another coworker has MS, and they're referred to as they're a victim of MS, just that language. If I suffer from chronic pain, are you going to view me as an equal contributor? I don't suffer from it. I live with it. And there are days that I am challenged by it because I am in pain. And there's a single mom out there raising 3 kids, on one wage, or who just lost her job. You could easily have stories of your life challenges that could make my disability experience pale in comparison. We need to, as a society, put disability on the same level as other life challenges. We could have the same, quote, medical diagnosis, and we can have very different capabilities and different limitations, even though someone would say we have the same disability. And so when you are offering assistance to people with disabilities, whether it's someone like me using a wheelchair, someone who's blind, someone who's even hearing impaired or deaf, you want to follow their lead. You want to ask them, never assume you know what someone needs. Still to this day, one of the first questions I always get when we talk about this part of the program, Disability Etiquette, is, should I hold the door open for someone with a wheelchair or a mobility impairment, a visual one? And it just kills me that it's pretty consistent that that's one of the first I get asked. And so my answer to that is, it depends. With disability, it's very unique from person to person. And so when it comes back to opening the door, I always say, if you're normally a very polite person and you're going to open it up for somebody else, then go ahead and do it. But also prepare that you might not get the response that you thought you were going to get, which was, oh, thank you. Because there can be reasons why someone like myself would turn down your assistance. Is when you come up to a door, you literally have to learn how to dance with it. And so you're coming up, you have to pull the door towards you, let's say, and then I have to back up, go ahead and try to weave in without the door hitting me in the back and whatever. And so if I don't learn how to get in that particular door, there's going to be some day when someone's not around who's going to open the door. It really is a power differentiation, because the history of people with disabilities has been that people are making decisions about us and for us for centuries. And so by you asking me, you are respecting me and saying, I'm going to follow your lead, because really I'm the expert on my disability and what I need. With folks who have a speech impairment or a communication a disability, you really want to make sure that you understand them. Years ago, before I really kind of got grounded in what's appropriate and what isn't, out of my fear and wanting to do it right, is I would jump in there and try to guess what they're saying before they're done talking. And that just drives you off track. You're showing them respect by being honest and saying, I want to connect with you and understand what you're saying. And so I'm going to tell you I don't get it. And if again you don't understand, which is very possible, then you go ahead and say, okay, I'm really sorry. Could you say it a different way? Or could we write this down? Or could we type on the computer, and go back and forth? And there's nothing wrong with saying, I'm sorry, I've never met anyone with this, particular disability, and I'm really uncomfortable, I don't want to do the wrong thing. Because again, you're letting them know this is new to you. And then I just kind of am able to push through that fear and be able to move forward and trying to figure out, kind of what the person is saying, and me be able to respond appropriately. When you are talking with someone who has a disability, you talk directly to that person. You keep your eye contact with them, not the sign language interpreter who may be present or family, friend, person who's there. Again, this goes back to respect, and that's who you're talking to. And if you've never communicated with someone who's using a sign language interpreter, then feel free to say, oh, this is the first time I've done this. Person with a disability. You're putting the person first, the disability second. I always tell people when they ask, well, how do you want to be referred to? I say, well, Stephanie. And if you need to bring up my disability, then you can just say, oh, she's a trainer and consultant who has a mobility impairment, or she uses a wheelchair, because that kind of tells you the situation. So I'm not saying go in and change everything about the language, but I'm asking you to think about what language do you use and do you kind of use in your head when you think about disability. It is part of who I am. It is not all of who I am. And so when we come back to the language piece, if you take a look at what your attitude is towards disability, is it way up here? Oh, she's just amazing. Is it down here, that poor woman? Or is it, oh, wow, that's pretty intriguing. I wonder how I'd be able to handle it. But, you know, she and I have the same interest in feminism and art and so forth. Question everything you think you know about disability, because it could be correct or it could be really way off base. We all make decisions based on past experience, but with disability, it really is an individualistic experience. We all experience our disability differently. And so the accommodations that this person who's sitting in front of you needs can be quite different than the family member that you remember from 10, 15 years ago. And so you really want to stay present to who this person is, what they're saying, and question what you think you know about disability.
All right, so I thought that was a really interesting video. And some of the language that they talked about, so she talked about, was person first language. And this is not covered in the book, and I do think it's important because there was a period of time where you may have referred to someone, and not you specifically, but in general, people with a disability were referred to as disabled or handicapped. And that sort of language is really minimizing to those people with disabilities. And so as you're dealing with people at your events, think of them as a person first, a person who needs XYZ or a person with XYZ disability. And so, instead of saying deaf, you would say a person who is deaf or a person who is hearing impaired. And I think that's important as you're learning to handle accessibility of your events and working with different types of people that may be coming to your events, to think of them as person first and use the person first language. I wanted to share with you a case study of a conference that I have that last year in particular, we've always, as sort of a part of the registration process, we always ask, do you have any sort of a disability that we might need to be aware of? I always review those, anybody who comments personally, and we reach out to them to say, I see you indicated on your registration form that you use a wheelchair. How can we help you at the conference? And I'd say at least 50% of the time the person says, I don't need anything. I just wanted you to know. Or I don't need anything, but I really appreciate that you reached out to me. Sometimes they might say, I want to make sure I get to attend these 5 sessions, and so could I possibly have reserved seating? Or I need someone to help me move around at some of the large functions because I use a cane and it's difficult for me. So as at this particular conference, the particular question we ask on the registration form is, we intend for CHI 2014 to be accessible for everyone. Do you have a disability or impairment of which we should be aware? And so as I mentioned, I review the requirements personally. Everyone who indicated something gets an email from me and we have a conversation. This particular conference is about 3,500 people. Generally, we have less than 20 people that indicate that they have some sort of a disability or need an accommodation of some sort. Last year, we also added reserved seating at all sessions and receptions, so 2 or 3 seats at the front of each room that say reserved for people with disabilities. They may or may not get used, but that ensures that if somebody shows up, they always have a place to sit, and they don't have to try and climb over people or sit in the back or do something that might be difficult for them. We also provided a private restroom facility with key access. So we had a couple of people that were using a wheelchair that needed assistance with the bathroom. One of them actually brought an attendant to the conference, and so we set aside a special bathroom, and I worked with the convention center to get key access so that they knew that whenever they needed to use the restroom, it would be fine, and they could just come to our office and pick up the key, and that worked out fine. The second part of this is the conference chairs really wanted to inform the community as a whole about what was being done to handle folks with accessibility challenges. And so we actually made a special page on the website itself, which is right here. And it says, we are committed to being a conference open and welcoming to academics, researchers, and practitioners with disabilities. And so we said, we've already collected the information. If you've registered but you're concerned that we maybe aren't aware of your needs, please email us, and that's our conference office email address. At the conference center, we provided some information about how to get around the building. We indicated that we would provide reserved seating, the private restroom facilities. We also invited them to stop by our conference office. So if you feel like there's something you need when you arrive, here's where we are located in room 706 at the Metro Toronto Convention Center. Feel free to come by and talk to us. And then we also include city resources. So, here's some information from the Convention and Visitors Bureau. Here's some information on taxi services, because not all taxis are equipped to provide service to somebody that has a wheelchair, so we provided the information here, and then some additional information. So that was a really big part of not only addressing the people's needs individually, but informing the whole community that we were doing this as an effort to raise the level of awareness of the group itself about the people in the community that had accessibility issues. So I wanted to provide that to you as an example of what you might be able to do if you have a particular conference or event where people have particular accessibility concerns. Okay, the last thing in the chapter, and I think it was covered fairly well, so we'll just do it a little quickly here. The book talks about different types of organizational structures. So there are several different types of organizational structure. This is an example of a flat organizational structure. This actually is fairly indicative of the organizational structure at my company, because we only have 7 employees at this moment in time. We have had as many as 10, but it kind of comes and goes and changes. And we do have some consultants also that come and go. But so for the most part, what we do is we break out our events by particular tasks, and somebody handles housing, somebody handles logistics, etc. Now, as a small company, we really need to be creative to keep our employees engaged, because you don't always want to say, well, Susie's good at housing, so she's always going to do housing for all of our conferences. After a little while, Susie's going to get bored. So you have to find a way to keep your employees engaged and make sure that even though there might not be, particular job promotion opportunities, that, you're still giving people new and interesting tasks to keep them engaged. This is an example of sort of a dynamic organization structure, and this would typically be a larger event team. If you're managing a giant event like the Super Bowl or the Olympics or something like that, you would have a very complex organizational structure, and you might have an event leader and then area managers and then individual tasks under those particular areas. So it does offer your employees good growth potential, but it's better suited to large organizations. And in our world, large events or companies that do many events per year might be set up like this. The book also touched a little bit on the top-down and the bottom-up organizational structure, but I didn't feel it gave you a really good explanation of when you would use each of them. So a top-down organizational structure is when you want to implement a specific vision. And so I have here the inauguration, the presidential inauguration. That's a good example where the event staff is sort of in the middle of the ladder in terms of autonomy and also, ultimate responsibility for the vision itself. You know, often somebody will say, we're going to have this event and it's going to be this type of event and I want these 18 different types of things. You know, not a lot of opportunity for individual creativity. And the event leader is not the ultimate visionary in this situation. You know, you have the inauguration committee up here at the top and they're saying, we're going to do it this way. And the event staff is really in charge of making sure that those things happen. A bottom-up organizational structure is typically something where it's a volunteer or member-focused organization. So associations that I work a lot with, they're typically a bottom-up organizational structure, and everything in this structure is designed to serve the member or the volunteers. And so the leadership tries to serve their goals, and the event team is pretty close to the top of the pyramid in terms of how to make those things happen, but it's where the larger group of people is really serving a smaller group, the volunteers or the members. All right, and lastly, managing diverse teams. The book kind of touched on this. You know, depending on your particular event team, you may have up to 4 different types of generations currently in the workplace. Veterans, who were folks that are born between 1922 and the end of World War II. Baby boomers, for most of us, that's our parents. Born, you know, between 1946 and 1964. You have Generation X, which are folks that are generally in their sort of mid-40s to about 30 right now. And then you have Generation Y, which has come behind that. You also have millennials, but for the most part, they are not quite yet in the workforce. So managers must understand different employee motivations, needs, and expectations. So if you have a team where you have members of all these different types of people, it's important to understand that they, as generations, have different types of characteristics, and that plays into how you manage them. You know, if you have somebody on your team that is a veteran, and that is still possible, you know, depending on some events. A lot of times we get retired folks that are serving as volunteers, so you might still have some of them depending on the kind of event you're doing. We do have a lot of, you know, baby boomers that are beginning to retire and serving as volunteers at our event. You know, for each of them, you know, they want different things out of their leader. You know, the veterans, for them, work is an obligation, something they have to do. For Generation Y, work is a means to an end. So it's to earn money, but it's not all about what you do for a job. You know, there are a lot of other things outside of their workplace that generation is focused on. And so it's important to understand sort of the different characteristics of the types of folks that are on your staff. And of course, not everybody is the same, and these are generalizations based on age and experience. But, you know, the one thing that I do think is important is tailoring your feedback as a manager and your rewards specifically to the people that are on your staff. So, you know, if you have folks that are Generation X, for them, the best reward is freedom. For Generation Y, they want meaningful work and they need a lot of feedback. So it depends on who you have on your staff, and I think this is a really interesting thing to learn more about. All right, and then to wind up here, policies and procedures. The book talked a lot about this, so we don't have to go over all of that. But policy generally are statements reflecting the mission and vision of your organization, and procedure are implementation tactics for those policies. And just like any manager, you know, as an event leader, you are only as effective as the teams that supports you. And so it's important to have good managerial skills and to keep your people doing things that are interesting to them and making sure that they're doing tasks that use their skills well so that you have a well-rounded team that can support you and support the success of your event. All right, so to review Chapter 4, major concepts are the 3 leadership styles: event leadership characteristics, volunteer management, accessibility and guest needs, interacting with persons with disabilities, and the person-first language. the types of organizational structures, and managing the multi-generational workplace. Some of the terminology you might see again, perhaps on the midterm: mirror etiquette, policy procedure, and person-first language. All right, so that is the end of our lecture, and I will see you in class next week.